Welcome to session 12, heating and cooling. The main things you need to heat and cool in your home are the space, the air that you're in, and hot water. They're really the biggest users of energy. Let's deal first with hot water. There are lots of options for hot water. 5 years ago, the talk was all about gas, instant gas, or the large-scale gas hot water systems. Interestingly enough, over the last few years, with the price rises in gas, this is no longer the cheapest option for homes in many cases. So what's the alternative? There are a range of alternatives. The most common systems in the past were basically a big tank with a heat source which either came from electricity or gas. You would get these sized for the number of occupants in a house. So it might be a 200 litre reservoir which is powered by electricity or gas. These are still available on the market. However, as previously mentioned, gas may lock you into an expensive system and electricity the same. The biggest drawback with these kind of systems is that as well insulated as they might be, you're heating a large body of water which you may or may not use, which cools down and requires reheating. So they're actually quite wasteful of energy. Now, if you have a renewable supply of energy to supply that electricity or even gas, then I guess you could make the decision that that was okay. One of the most common systems now installed is the instantaneous gas hot water service. You can also get instantaneous electric ones, but they're far less common, much more common in Europe than in Australia. In Australia, they look like this. They're small space occupying sorts of things. They're not big. They can be put in, you can put 2 or more to a house as long as you've got gas plumbed and you're not relying on bottles. It certainly has been quite a cost-effective way of providing hot water. Their purchase and installation cost is quite modest, and they have the advantage of not wasting hot water. So you're only using gas when you're using hot water. There are some places where solar hot water isn't a great option, simply because for a lot of the year you just don't get enough sun and enough energy to heat the hot water. But where you do, systems like the Apricus evacuated tube system can work really, really well. If you are looking at a storage system still, then what is more common these days is something called a heat pump hot water service. There are a number of brands that do these, but they use the same sort of technology as reverse cycle air conditioners to take heat out of the air. They're much more energy efficient than the standard old electric element systems. They are more expensive and they do have some maintenance, but in certainly climates that are a little bit warmer, they don't work so well in really cool climates, but warmer climates, they are a very cost-effective way of heating hot water in terms of their running costs. The final one we need to look at is wood or solid fuel hot water services, and the boiler systems are not very common in Australia, but we are seeing quite a few hot water systems where the heat comes from a wood fire that would have been put in anyway. So a potbelly stove or a slow combustion stove, which has what they call a wetback, and that provides hot water to a storage tank. So you take the view that you're going to light the fire anyway, the fire heats the hot water. There is also a supplementary source, so you can heat that hot water if the fire's not going, and that could either be gas or electricity. These sorts of systems are often linked to hydronic heating in the floor and or on wall radiators, and you can get a design where in fact that hot water system comes, the heat comes from a lot of sources and it gets split in a tank to go to a shower and then also to the floor or the heating elements. You can't actually mix those two because they operate at different pressures, so you have to have a heat exchange system, and as you can hear from what I'm saying, they can get quite relatively complex, and you really need to talk to a specialist to have that designed. In rural settings, in cooler climates, it can be a really smart solution though, where somebody's going to have a wood heater and that will work really well for them. In the absence of any of those fuels like gas or wood, of course you're powering any of this with electricity, and that's why we talk about solar energy, because if you can generate your own solar, then that changes the economics compared to buying it from the grid. One of the more obvious things that clients look for in a green home is solar panels and renewable energy. Over the last few years, there's been rapid changes in this space and significant decline in the cost of systems, and particularly most recently, significant changes in the prices of batteries. And batteries are important if you've got a working family who are away from the home for most of the day when the sun's shining on the roof. That's when your solar panels are generating the electricity, but actually that's electricity that you want to use at night when you get home. So batteries are really your only choice to being able to use that energy when you get home. And up until the last year or so, a solar and battery system would have a payback period of up around 10 years. Well, now it can be much closer to 5, and even in one case I know around 3.5 years you can pay off that system. It's really important to get this right. It's a new industry, and to be perfectly honest, there are some cowboys out there who will do the wrong thing. Product substitution, poor design, poor installation. I can't tell you how many stories I have of poorly designed and installed systems. So it really is important to get somebody locally who you know is going to do the right thing, and you know, you'd be looking for some testimonials to make sure that you could be confident in what they were doing. It pays to put thought in the construction stage for where the inverters and batteries and the equipment associated with solar is going to be. There may be an opportunity to create some sort of little utility space, if you like, where a battery can be housed and stored that it's not obtrusive to the owners of the home. If you have something like an in-slab hydronic system, you'll need controllers for that as well, and pipe work. So there may be a space in the design phase, or certainly before you've finished your lining on the walls, put some thought into where that battery, where that equipment is going to go, so you don't make life hard for the installer later on. In your green home, it's already designed to minimise the need for heating and cooling, but of course, for most places and most clients, you will actually need some mechanical heating and cooling. And again, in the last few years, things have changed here quite a lot. It used to be the case that gas was a good, cheap heating option. That's no longer true. And really, probably the most cost-effective system you're looking at now are heat pumps and reverse cycle systems. There are a range of other options though, including you know, for rural places, people who might like a fire, you know, an open fire or a little fire system of one sort or another. You can actually get wetbacks now, so that as you burn your fire to heat the space, you're also heating hot water, and then that water can be moved around the house into radiators. In fact, it actually works quite well to have a little boiler. There are a whole heap of them now, and it's very common in Europe, and that boiler runs hot water around the house to radiators, creates a really nice sort of warmth. That's called a hydronic system. There are a few companies around who design these. It's important to get them designed right. It's like any system, you'll be needing to look at the house, and the designer will look at the insulation and the orientation and all of that, and design a system of a certain amount of kilowatts of heating for that house. So you need to have somebody who knows what they're doing there, and ideally you think about that in the construction phase early enough so that their life's not made hard either. You need to sequence the building of that. And the final thing is where those hydronic systems are actually built into the slab. So where you've got hot water coils running through the slab, obviously that needs to be designed and thought of very early. The heating of the water in that slab used to be done by gas, but again, that can be a really expensive option. So it makes sense to have other ways of heating that water. And it could be that it's solar hot water, it could be that it has a heat pump system as well that's run by photovoltaic panels. But again, you know, there are a heap of options there, and you really need to find a good local, you know, heating and cooling contractor, and you need to talk to them early enough to make sure the design fits into the home and is going to be integrated with the build.